In the end, we will all be judged by the courage of our hearts. That's what King Leonidas says in 300 as he and his men prepare for their final stand. It's a powerful scene full of grit and defiance, but it's also a stark contrast to much of what we see in Christian media today. A realm often plagued by shallow stories, uninspired characters, and a general lack of courage to create something truly epic. In this episode of Reforming Nerdom, we'll be diving into a tough but necessary topic: why loser theology creates loser art. Ever wondered why so much Christian media fails to capture the imagination? Why our stories often feel flat or, worse, downright cringeworthy? The answer might lie deeper than poor writing or low budgets. It could be rooted in our theology, specifically the kinds of beliefs that hand the world over to Satan and expect nothing but defeat. Why does Christian media so often fall short of greatness? Could it be that a theology of despair and retreat naturally leads to art that's, well, equally bleak and uninspired? How can we create stories that are good, true, and beautiful if we don't actually believe in a future where Christ's kingdom triumphs here and now? And what about the rise of dystopian and cataclysmic narratives? Why are we so drawn to tales of worlds falling apart, of humanity on the brink? Could it be that these stories reflect the theology that expects everything to get worse before it gets better? A theology that struggles to create anything hopeful or redemptive? Today we'll explore why a worldview that hands the world over to darkness can't produce anything truly worth watching or reading. We'll discuss why, if we're going to create art that resonates with the deepest truths of the gospel, we need a theology that inspires courage, hope, and victory, not one that leaves us waiting for the end. So join us as we take a hard look at the connection between our beliefs and the stories we tell. Because if we want to create art that reflects the beauty and power of God's kingdom, we can't afford to settle for a theology of defeat.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Reforming Nerdom podcast. I am one of your hosts, Jordan Cecile, and I'm joined by my two buddies, Nate Wright and Ben Emery. Boys, how are you?
Well, Amazon's ruining Lord of the Rings, and Disney's ruining Star Wars, and Netflix has the rights to Narnia, so doing really well.
So life is terrible. Thanks for asking.
Give me something positive. There has to be some positive.
All right, I'll give you a positive right now. So I was on Prime looking for something to watch, as is often the case when it's like, you know what? Let's do something we haven't done in a while. Let's watch a movie. And then you start looking through old movies and you realize there's nothing ever to watch, except I found something to watch that my wife hated, but I loved. I don't know if either of you guys have ever seen this movie, American Ninja.
Oh,
dude,
that sounds familiar.
It is so bad.
Who's in it?
It's there's nobody is in it.
Nobody. Okay.
I'm pretty sure it was a straight to TV movie, but for whatever reason, I loved it when I was a kid. And side note, if my parents ever listen to this podcast, you should never have let me watch that movie when I was as young as I was. The violence and vulgarity is terrible. But man, it is it's one of those awful movies. You know how they came up with like the genre of like Sharknado kind of stuff where it was like watching bad movies is cool. This was like the OG bad movie that I loved. And it was just because I was obsessed with ninjas. But American Ninja is on Prime. So Ben, if you need your day turned around, just know that American Ninja is on Prime.
Okay, there's another one on Prime in the ninja category, Three Ninjas. And,
oh, yes.
Like the little kids?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
And that was one of those, because I loved that growing up. Like, there's three of them, right? Rocky, Tum Tum. Like three brothers, Rocky, Colt, and Tum Tum. But then I think they did three movies. And I saw it again, actually similar thing. This was a few months ago, and I was just going through Prime, and usually Prime has nothing. Like there's not much on Prime that's really that good. But yeah, we were going through, and I found Three Ninjas, and I was really uh skeptical, or I guess like hesitant, because you always have that age filter where you watch something when you're a kid and it's like the greatest thing ever. You go back and watch it, and it's like, well, that's nice, and I can never watch that again. But Three Ninjas, it actually held up. I actually
Totally.
really enjoyed it. My wife
Have you
thought it was just
have you showed that to
awful.
your boys, Ben?
I that one I haven't yet actually.
You should. Like, that was one we used that for a family movie night one time, and Judah was like in heaven, and the girls are like, "Why isn't there a princess in this movie?" But it's fantastic, and you will get attacked. You'll get
I was
attacked by
gonna
your
say
son
I can
more
just
than
envision
already.
what the next like week and a half would be like after watching that
Did either of
movie.
you guys either of you guys ever watch Pink Panther where his like butler
Mhm.
guy Kato would just attack him from the most random places?
Yeah.
That's sort of what life in my house is like. Judah just every once in a while you like go to sit down on the couch and you realize he's under the cushions and he just you know what I mean? Like he will attack you from anywhere.
Is that just like a general thing with all boys? Like do most boys, Ben, like you have more boys than I do. Like Nate and I, we each have one boy. My son's 3, but like he always just wants to fight. And like
Yeah.
like always. There's never a time where if I just say like go wrestle or whatever, he just always wants to. Is that your experience as well with all your boys?
Oh yeah. Like there is never a time uh where if you said let's wrestle that they would say no.
Yeah. Well,
Ever.
it's funny, Nate, because you last week you'd mentioned just how it's kind of like built into us, this whole, like in men particularly, this dominion, taking dominion.
Yeah.
And it's so funny whenever Haddon gets hurt, I always now am just hey, but like even today, funny, he scratched his face. He's like, Daddy, I like hurt my face. And I was like, oh buddy, that looks like you just, you beat up a bad guy. Smile
Yeah.
immediately, and he was just like, yeah. And
Yeah, I
so
did.
it's so funny. Yeah, like it was so funny
Yeah.
how he just right away just thought, yeah, sure did. And like he was all sad and everything about it, but like put in the context of him beating up a bad guy, greatest thing ever. He was like a mark of honor now on his face.
Yeah,
Yeah, so one
absolutely.
one thing we did actually watch just last week I think for movie night was uh something Disney did right but did it like 50 years ago was the old Davy Crockett movie. And the boys have been like I looked out the window the other day and one boy was I assume Davy Crockett protecting his sister and the other ones were screaming Indians running towards him and he shot them all dead and it was just like this is the best.
Your neighbors are gonna be like, "What is going on with that family? Why do the kids keep yelling at engines?"
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean like and of course like I've gotten to the point where I judge the quality of the movie based on the um like notice that Disney puts in front of
Mm.
it
Yeah.
Yeah.
that this is likely a movie that we would never make now but we still want you to we know
For
that
its
people will
historic
watch it so
value
we're
or
not going to take it off of our our platform.
So
yeah.
you didn't
Yeah.
rebuke your sons for cultural appropriation, Ben?
Oh no, we appropriate everything.
And what a for anybody who's listening in the US, we're obviously the three of us are Canadian, and so we have Canadian Thanksgiving at the beginning of October. So like right in time for Thanksgiving, your boys are
Oh yeah,
killing
it was
Indians in the
perfect.
backyard.
Yeah.
It's so good.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like there's because in the Davy Crockett movie how like the whole thing it's like it's got that like the little jingle right like the
Yeah.
Davy Crockett so and then one of the one of so each part of the show there's a different verse that they sing and I mean like one of them was like hunting the Redskins down and I'm just like I like just genuinely shocked that this is still on Disney Plus.
But
It,
so joyfully happy about it.
like have you guys found any like really good newer movies that are coming out for kids? Because we're having a hard time. We just actually got we finally paid for it. Do you guys know Angel? Like Angel Studios? They're
Yeah.
they're the ones who like The Chosen and
I know of it,
they
but
also
I don't have it or anything, no.
Yeah, so they used to be like their model previously was like you kind of pay it forward. You can watch it for free, but you can donate and pay for somebody else afterwards to watch it as well. I think that model died because our kids we had watched. I guess it was probably a year ago. The Wing Feather TV show. Do you guys know
Oh
that?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I don't know if you watched it, but like our kids loved it, and so we were waiting for season two. They ended up putting it behind a like a paywall, and they said they were going to release it after it had been behind this paywall for a bit. So we waited probably like 3 or 4 months for this free period to come back, and it doesn't look like they do. So, anyways, we just watched. We're in the middle now of watching Wing Feather season two, and I mean it's nice because we actually now have a movie that we can or a show that's
Nice.
pretty good quality, obviously good story. Um, and but anyways, it just makes me wonder. Like there are a few shows that we let our kids watch because
yeah,
there's just so much that we can't.
yeah.
But even when it comes to movies, like my one Alice, she's in December. She wants to go to a movie at the movie theater for her birthday, so she's turning 7, and it's just like, well, I guess we'll see, but I don't know of anything because I think it was even that new Pixar movie. Was it Inside Out? Is that what it is? Inside Out 2,
Yeah, yeah.
and I've just like heard that some of the stuff and the thinking is kind of leaning towards potentially making the character transgender or something like that. So it's just that there's going to be all this insidious little things kind of scattered throughout, and it's like, man, there's just nothing really great that we can even like sit down and watch with our kids or encourage our kids to watch.
Well, even I think the last time we went to the theater, actually, I think Jordan, we were with you guys, right? We went and watched. Our families went and watched the new Ninja Turtles. Um, right?
I don't know if
Did,
that was us.
oh, I thought we went with you. But we went and watched that new Nickelodeon
Yep.
uh Ninja Turtles movie, and it was okay,
Mhm.
right? Like there were some good parts in it, but April was just like a woke, you know, uh, visible minority, and the bad guys ended up not really being bad guys, just misunderstood, and like you know what I mean. It was kind of gay,
Yeah.
but it was Ninja Turtles enough that my kids enjoyed it. But yeah, there's not a
Well,
whole
that's
lot of
it.
good
Like,
stuff out there.
yeah, like they're not gonna know. I mean, playing the video game and like our kids, we've had them watch some of the OG Ninja Turtles like TV show. So on you can watch it. I think it's on like YouTube, Nickelodeon, or whoever owns the rights. Like you can go watch a whole bunch of the original shows. So I don't think our kids are picking up on the fact that April was a redhead, thin, white character, and
Right.
now in the show is like a short, fat black girl, and it's just like it's just like shows how insidious. Like again, it's just how hell bent they are on just sliding those things in there. And
Right.
actually, it's interesting because even in the Wing Feather saga in the TV show, I can't remember exactly, but I'm fairly certain there's a character in it who um, is not black in the show. And again, I have no issues if the black character don't care, like whatever, not an issue for me. But then it's just like this little subtle thing where, well, why in the TV show is she now black?
Right.
And it's
Yeah.
like what? Why'd you have to do that? Like, if the character in the book is black, make them black. If they're white, have there be white. So it's just even you kind of even see that a little bit in even like the temptation that we as Christians even face is
Yeah.
like still
Of
kind of conforming to that.
empowering, right? Like,
Yeah.
and the underlying issue there is this idea that um we can only relate to people who look like us, which actually just reinforces the racism that they say they want to fight, right? The idea is like, oh, like I can't relate to a black character, therefore there need to be black characters. Like, well, why can't I? Well, because
Hmm.
their underlying presupposition is that we are different races. My underlying presupposition is that we are one race in Adam, and one of us has more melanin in the skin than the other. Like it's just such an insidious. But hey, it gives us lots of opportunities to play spot the lie with our kids. So
Yeah. Well, what do you spot the lie? I think that's a good thing to even bring up. Like, what is that you do with your kids?
yeah, so we it drives my wife nuts sometimes, but she's bought into the it in general. So we call it
Can
spot
we
the
ever
lie.
just watch a movie?
That's exactly what. Yeah, can't we just? I pause it, and she just kind of looks at me, and she makes sure the kids never sees it, but I'll get a little eye roll at the second pause. But So whatever we're watching, if it's a TV show or a movie or whatever, I'll pause it at certain times and just say, okay, what's the lie? This actually started back like when Quinn was like 6 and she's 9 now, so like 3 years ago. She wanted to watch Elsa because everybody had seen Frozen except her, kind of thing. And at Christmas or at birthday parties, everybody's dressing up as Elsa, and she'd never seen it. So we watched Frozen together, her and I, and in that, like, the big song that's how's that go again? It's
Let it go.
Let It Go. Yeah, that's the one. Thanks, Ben. Do you want to sing it for me just to jog my memory, or you good?
I'd love to.
Do it.
But there's a line in it where she says, "No right, no wrong, no rules for me. I'm free."
Yeah.
And I was just like, I can't let that go and watch the rest of this movie because it's near the beginning. So I paused it and it was just kind of like, okay, like, let's play spot the lie here, Quinn. What's the lie that she just said? And so we talked about how, rules are there to actually give us increased freedom within the boundaries of God's creation. God gave us rules so that we know how life works best in his world, that rules aren't actually restriction. Freedom isn't just the throwing off of all restrictions. Freedom is something that we only find in Christ, all that kind of stuff. So, and you do that to the 6-year-old brain. But so we play spot the lie. So if I pause it, and then the kids will sometimes be like, okay, you have to rewind it, and then I rewind it. And what I'm trying to do is teach them to think critically, teach them to absorb media, movies, TV shows critically, so that they're not just, because I think there's way too many people in the world who they just, whatever they believe is the last thing that they heard, right? There's no critical, there's no sort of discernment. And so it's just me trying to teach my family discernment is us playing spot the lie.
Well, and that's even in like generally good shows.
Exactly.
Those things are in there, right? And so the danger is like, okay, so this is one of the good shows, so we can just put this one on, let it play,
Yeah.
never think twice about it.
Oh yeah. I pause just
So,
as many Christian shows as I do pagan shows.
Yeah.
so how do you even balance that, Nate, with your kids? Because like we don't want to fall in the one side of the ditch that's okay. We're not going to watch anything that might have any trace of bad, whatever,
Yep.
what, not just like theology, but untrue things or unhelpful or potentially sinful things, and we're just going to abstain entirely, versus like still trying to train up our kids to think critically about those things. So like, how do you kind of think about that when it comes to content? Like, do you have a line where it's like, okay, we're not going to go past this, or is it more
Yeah.
case by case?
So the standard I give my kids is the same standard I give myself. It just applies differently based on age, right? So anything that celebrates sin is just off the table for us, right? So whether that's celebrating LGBT stuff, whether that's celebrating violence, and there could be violent movies. I think we all talked about how great Demolition Man is, right? There's violence in that movie, but it's like, it's not glorifying violence. It's not celebrating violence. Again, I don't mind in stuff that I watch some like profanity. I don't mind the swearing doesn't necessarily bother me unless it's like celebrating it, right? Is that the thing? Is how many times the guy drops the F bomb in a quick succession? Is that the funny thing about the show? And so anything that celebrates, right? I think about Game of Thrones, right? It's just like, it's just, I've never been able to watch Game of Thrones. I had Christians telling me to watch Game of Thrones, and I think I got 10 minutes into the first episode. I'm like, obviously I can't watch this, right? Celebrating incest and nudity and all that kind of stuff. So it's the same thing, but for my kids. So for example, our kids watched Peppa Pig, and early on, that's like the show that they watched when they were like 4 or 5, when we started letting them watch screens and stuff. And that was fine. And then there was a season where they started introducing like a lesbian couple. It's never said, it's never stated, it's just somebody's got two moms.
Oh, look, two mommies.
Right. And which is sometimes even more insidious, because if they talk about it, then it's like a thing. But if it's just the thing in the background, it's like, oh, that person has two mommies. So we actually just stopped watching that one because I think that the intent behind that is to normalize something that we don't want normalized with our
Yeah.
kids. Our kids watch Paw Patrol. There's lots of opportunities for spot the lie in Paw Patrol. So for me, it's is it celebrating something that we would call sin? And I think that there's all kinds of examples of I think early on, I think our kids watch some of the Wiggles stuff, and we actually just end up not using the Wiggles because as much as it was great to have the kids singing along, there was just so many of their episodes have their live music stuff, and a lot of their live music stuff is trying to teach people to be okay with all different kinds of people, which sounds great, but there's always going to be a line in there about who you love and that sort of stuff. So that's sort of the line for us. I mean, other than specifics, like the other thing we have is our kids can't watch YouTube. There's too much crap on there, and it's too quick to jump between videos. And we just watch an episode of whatever they want to watch. They know they can't just pick the next thing. And so if they want to watch something, they say, "Hey, Dad," or "Hey, Mom, can I watch this today?" And if we have time to sit down and watch the first episode with them, we'll watch it. And we'll give Quinn a little bit more leeway than we will Judah and Harper. So it's I think you just got to be careful. You just don't let them have free reign of the remote on any platform. It's just too dangerous these days.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just interesting because I liken that to another thing that you've taught from the pulpit about even things like alcohol or tobacco, how training, like, it's not just enough to abstain from those things, but what we ought to do is be able to master those things and not have them master us. So I think it's like,
Yeah.
it is such an important thing with our kids that I don't want my kids, when they hear somebody swear, to then all of a sudden just feel compelled to swear, where it's like, well, no, I want them to know how to react and respond to that. Or when they
Yeah.
do see two moms, I want them to know right away, okay, well, that's sin and we need to not celebrate that, not just have this, be totally confused by it and have no idea what to do with it. And but I think a lot of that comes to just, we got to have these conversations with our kids, and how many Christians just let the TV, the magic box in their living room, actually disciple their kids for them. So then it's like, well, obviously I can't have them watch, a show that introduces a potentially sinful concept, because, well, I'm not going to actually correct that,
Right.
because I don't, one, they might not know how to, or they just might not think that they need to. And
Or they
so,
might not know it's on the show because they give their kids way too long a leash
yeah,
with that stuff. But
yeah.
I'll give you a little quick story that I think is so. Even when we had the kids stop watching Peppa Pig, we actually we use a couple like commonsensemedia.com and a couple places like that that kind of give you a little bit of a rundown of the show as well. You got to watch it for yourself though. But we figured out the episode that they introduced this, two mommies, and we went and watched the episode with our kids. And we said, "Do you notice what they introduced here?" And they all recognized it right away. "Oh yeah, that so and so has two mommies." And so we just said, like, this is why we're going to stop watching the show. And it's not because we just immediately stop or cancel or stop watching anything that has anything bad in it. It's because, did you notice that they didn't even mention it? They're not mentioning that this is different. They're not mentioning that this is weird. That's because they want you to think that this is totally normal. And do you have any questions about that? Then our kids ask questions about it. And it was actually interesting. I think it was like a week, maybe max 2 weeks later, our kids are over at a neighbor's house who's non-Christian, who lives a couple doors down from us. And it came up where they were playing Barbies or something like that. And the little girl said to Quinn, "These two are married." And Quinn's like, "Well, two boys can't get married." And she's like, "Oh yeah, two boys can get married, two girls can get married. You can marry whoever you want." And Quinn was actually equipped for that conversation. Quinn actually was just like, "Well, I don't believe that two boys or two girls should get married because God was the one who made marriage. And he tells us that it's between one man and one woman." So then the little girl goes and tells her mom, and her mom says something to Quinn, and Quinn's like, "I think I should go home and tell my parents about this." And it was actually fine. Like, the mom wasn't disrespectful or anything. She just kind of said, "In our house, we're okay with whoever people want to marry." And we had a conversation. It was all fine. But like, Quinn would not have been equipped for that conversation like she was had a week or two earlier we not just sat down and showed her why we're not going to watch this show anymore. So I think you just miss opportunities to disciple your kids if you don't walk them through the decisions that you're making in terms of what you will and won't let them watch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, super important. Well, why don't we, before we get into, even though that, I mean, I feel like we had a lengthier intro there than I was expecting, but it's good. That's who cares?
Well, and it lends
But
itself to our topic today, so it's good.
yeah, it does. It actually does. So Before we kind of move on into that, just a little bit of housekeeping. Just to remind people, we are Reforming Nerdom, where we get together every week to talk all things nerd culture, but all from an unapologetically Christian worldview. You can watch all of our episodes on YouTube and listen on podcast services around the world. And if you do love what we do, you can become a subscriber on Patreon, where you'll get all of our episodes ad-free, some exclusive shows, and other awesome stuff. And this episode is again brought to you by the Ezra Institute, but we'll hear more about that a bit later. Now, before we even actually kind of transition into our topic of the show, there's actually a couple one correction from last week that my wife pointed out when she listened to the episode, and it is in regards to our scoring from our high score. The one question about Darth Revan,
Yeah.
Ben answered that not needing multiple choice. So we only gave him 1.5 points. So technically, he should have had 3 points. So technically, Ben's score actually was 1.5 points higher. So it was actually, what would that be, 12-10.
What are you
So
doing to
Ben
me,
actually,
Melissa? Just
yeah.
Melissa, just stop
So-
listening to the
I was
episode
totally
unless you're gonna help me.
expecting a we've reversed the decision here, but I
No,
just
no,
stomped
no.
you a little more
On
than
further
we thought.
reflection,
That's fine.
Yeah, Ben was that much better than you, Nate. And
oh man.
so, anyways, that was just a, you know what?
I've been
I will
walking
address
around
that.
like Ben's only 0.5 points better than me all week, and here I am, not yeah,
a full 2
unreal.
points. And then so another thing that we mentioned last week was, and you guys I think will appreciate this, was we mentioned wanting to do an N64 tournament, and it just so happens that in the news there is a company. What are they called?
Oh boy.
They're called Analog, and they became popular because they recreated a Game Boy. And so they took like modern tech and so you can now, and it actually works with your existing Game Boy cartridges, and but the screen like upreses it's like a really cool device. So people who are really into like game preservation and being able to play their old games, they just announced a pre-order for an N64 that they're updating as well, that works with the original cartridges.
Oh
It
man,
upscaled to 4K. You can plug in your controllers or buy these new controllers.
I mean,
So
what would N64 even look like in 4K though?
okay, so I
It's
told
still like little boxes, little cubes.
I joked with Mel, and I was like, well, we might have our first official Reforming Nerdom expense, because like
yes.
this just might actually have to happen because it's really cool. So for people watching, I'll put in a little video from the website, and you just get a bit of a feel for what it is. It looks like a 64. It's obviously updated, but I'm curious, what do you guys think? An updated N64, 4K, Bluetooth, all the fun stuff. What would you expect that to cost? Or what would you be willing to pay for it? Maybe that's the question. I'll tell you what it actually will cost, but what would you be willing to pay for that?
I'm super cheap, so
Yeah,
that's
a bad
I'm probably
question
not
to
the-
ask me.
I'm not the right one to ask. I don't know. Like, I mean, I don't know. I think we spent like $200 or something like that on everything related to Judah's Switch, and that was very reasonable. I mean, I think something like that. I don't know. Are you getting 4 controllers? Am I getting GoldenEye with it? In that case, I'd spend $300 on it, but I suspect it's probably closer to 5 or 6.
Okay, Ben, what do you think?
I think it's less. I don't know. I've seen some of those, like some of the Super Nintendo and Nintendo kind of things that are like that have come out in the past, and they're somewhat reasonable.
We're living
I
though
don't know.
under Biden and Trudeau. So like, have you
Yeah,
accounted
that's
for
true. So
inflation?
what are we saying? What is this? Is this just the console, like console and a single controller or something? Is that what
So,
this is?
In the box, you get an analog 3D, which is what it's called, the analog 3D. It says an HDMI cable, USB cable, and a USB-C power supply. So it does not look like it comes with a controller.
Not even.
So
Because it works with like actual
yeah, it does. Yeah, it has like
legit
the
N64
it has the
controllers.
inputs,
Okay,
but then you can
Who
for
has any of those sitting
Um,
around?
I have two of them and my N64 plugged into my basement
course you do.
TV, of
So
course.
we don't even need this.
But the problem is, like, it looks awful. It just looks dreadful
Right,
on the
you said
TV.
that,
And so,
yeah.
like,
See,
this,
I feel like you
That's
just don't
fair.
remember what an N64 looks like.
I mean, I'm spoiled by games like God of War, which
Yeah. Yeah,
are
I feel like this is
insane.
not going to look that much better.
I want I so we're gonna find out. The jury is out on it. But then what do
Okay,
you
so
think?
I don't know. I'm going to say for just the console
Yeah.
249. 199. I think it's cheaper. 199.
Oh, you should have gone with your gut.
Ah.
249.99.
Oh, jeez.
Man, we
Yeah.
would have given you an entire extra point.
Yeah. Yeah, you can get it in black or white. But anyways, I just thought that was super cool because now you can like actually plug it in directly into your TV. It's going to be upscaled. Use your actual cartridges, which so funny thing is, I could probably sell the one I have right now for close to, because like some people will spend
Yeah,
serious coin
retro.
on an
Totally.
N64. So if I could sell my original for this, but then it's like mine's one of those transparent or translucent green ones. Like it was
Oh, yeah. Those were weird
and
looking.
it was awesome. So I have that, the green one with the
By
green
weird,
and
do you
orange
mean
controller.
awesome?
Yeah, like come on now. So anyways, I just thought that was pretty cool. But yeah, so maybe one day we will be playing
I feel like
N64
we
on
need
this.
to get us like back into the swing of dominating in GoldenEye, and then I
Yeah.
feel like as Patreon gets up and going, like maybe the first couple people who sign up for the top tier of patron, like come down
Mm.
and we do like a GoldenEye tournament with people who sign up for the top tier of patron.
Oh yeah.
I've,
Yeah.
I've this is no promises, like we're just getting rolling here, but I'm just
Oh,
saying that's
I
my vote.
promise.
Yeah. No, I think that would be I think that'd be a lot of fun. All right. Well, why don't we kind of pivot now into our topic of the show? We're only 30 minutes in. Why not? We so today's episode, as you can probably tell if you're listening or watching by the title, is why loser theology creates loser art. And last week when we were laying the foundation for the podcast, the show, what we want to do is, we're trying to show how theology and culture aren't mutually exclusive, how theology leads to your outlook on culture, your outlook for the future, your entire worldview of how you perceive things and live and act. And one of the things that we had said was, we have, I think, if in terms of the overall percentage of Christians today, I think the three of us would probably have what is a minority, a historic but a minority position in terms of how we view the world, how we our expectations for the future. And most Christians would have a very different outlook on things. I think you guys would probably agree with that.
Yep.
Most Christians, at least in our church, when Nate, you taught through Mark 13, that was a pretty jarring, Olivet discourse, talking about what happened, as we would say, at the end of the age, and what Jesus was saying was going to happen. Like that radically messed with a lot of people because they just didn't even have categories in their brain for that. So
Yep.
what we want to do now is just kind of talk about why the pervasive position or worldview for the church today, why I think all of us would think that the state of media today is actually largely a result of the last 100 years or so, 150 years of a theology as, John MacArthur, who, for listeners who don't know, he's a great godly man. I'm thankful for him in many ways. He's a pastor down in California. His ministry has blessed many people, myself included, for a long time. But I think it was within the year, in one of his sermons, he literally said the words, "We lose down here,"
Yeah.
and as he was teaching people about our time, like what the earth and how we live right now in contrast to eternity, and he says we lose down here, and so like so many Christians would actually think that way and think and believe that. So Nate, why don't you even, or one of you guys, I guess doesn't matter who, why don't you even kind of tee up or the distinction between what is the predominant view versus what we would actually believe, and in whatever order you guys think makes the most sense. But I think it's probably helpful for our listeners to hear, well, what do we think in
Yeah,
contrast to what is the predominant view held by most Christians?
sure. Um, So there's a couple things that I would say. Maybe I'll just hit the first one and then pass it over to Ben. I mean, there's obviously I would say there's multiple ways you could answer this question. I think generally speaking, when we say loser theology, we're not just talking about like you know, theology that we're trying to insult. We mean loser theology in that John MacArthur believes that we lose in the world and we win by going to heaven when we die. And that the world itself is going to be continually getting worse. Which means that if art is a reflection of culture, which I believe it is, and if you want to read a really good book on that, there's a great book called Redeeming Leonardo or Saving Leonardo. I can't remember which it's called, by Nancy Piercy. And she talks about how art reflects culture and kind of actually shows it through visual art, art pieces, and everything from Renaissance and abstract and all that kind of stuff, and how the predominant ideas and ideals of culture actually get reflected in the subsequent years in the artwork that we hold dear and that we value. And so the point there though is that if we believe that the world is going to get worse and worse, then that means we believe that art will continue to get worse and worse. Meaning that the movies that we make, the video games that we make, the comic books that we make, the heroes that we create, all that kind of stuff is just going to keep getting worse and worse until we go up to heaven. And the problem with that is twofold, right? So not only do you have an idea that what we make here on the earth is not going to last, because in this predominant view, and I'll just outline it real quick. Your average Christian evangelical in North America generally believes that the destiny of this world is that the church will be taken off the world will kind of be handed over to Satan, that Satan kind of wins down here, which is sort of John MacArthur's point there. It gets worse and worse until Christ has to come back, nuke the earth, so to speak, and then recreate a new heavens and a new earth and put us back on it, who have been kind of escaped to heaven. And all I would say to that is I think that's a view of scripture that is new historically. That's not the view of the vast majority of Christians who have lived over the last 2,000 years. It's an aberration of the original position of the church, which was that the gospel of Jesus Christ and the church of Jesus Christ would actually influence the culture and win the culture through the power of the Holy Spirit and the preaching of his word. So if we don't believe that this world is winnable, if we don't believe that this world is it can be kind of saved, then everything we make down here will eventually dissipate because this world is destined to be nuked. And secondly, there's a view, a sort of view of art and movies that they will always get worse. There's no redeeming these things. Why even try, right? We're not going to battle. We're not going to beat abortion. We're not going to beat the LGBT activists. We're not going to beat any of this stuff. Therefore, why fight for them? And I would just say that the overall trajectory of scripture is from a garden to a garden city. We don't get back to a garden. It's not like the history of God's world goes full circle and gets us back to a garden. The story actually goes from garden to garden city, which means that like what we make here, what we do with the raw materials of creation, right? So think of it this way: creation, grapes, God made grapes. Culture is wine, right? We've taken the raw materials of creation and we've made something with it. So, and wine is one of the many things, right? Same thing with like wheat to bread, and wine and bread flow in the eternal state, right? And it's a city, meaning that we actually what we make and what we create and what we build here lasts forever. So when we say loser theology creates loser art, we're not trying to be pejorative to any position in general, although that's a happy accident. I think what we're trying to say is that if you don't think that this world is eternal, then there is no motivation to make good art here because we believe that it's not going to last forever. But that's not the view. Like when you look around at some of the great cathedrals and basilicas that people made as churches, as centers of worship, just 300 or 400 years ago, they were creating something with intricate design and architecture and beautiful things that they built those things to last forever. Right now we build things thinking, it'll last 50 years, right? You got a 50-year warranty on your roof and all that kind of stuff. Well, the Sistine Chapel was not created for the next 50 years. It was created to last forever. And so I think that, and that's just visual architectural art. What does that do when you have writers who are writing stories that will last forever, and film, producers and writers who are making films that will last forever? Like, I just don't think many people think about this. Like, what movies are we going to watch in eternity? Most Christians would be like, well, none. We're just gonna be worshiping God. Really? Like that's your view of eternity? We'll just be like, most Christians, I think we're all going to get wings and we'll be joining with those angels, just going around the throne room going, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. The whole earth is filled with his glory. And then if you say something like that sounds boring, there's this pietistic sort of clutch my pearls. Oh, you would be bored in the presence of God? It's like, yeah, we were created as earthy beings. We were created in the image of God. We are meant to create. And so the fact that our creativity and the things that we put our hands to will last forever, I think is necessary. It's a necessary presupposition if we're going to build beautiful things, if we're going to make beautiful art, if we're going to, create great stories, etc.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think it's like most of those, at least in our church. I mean, we have a pretty diverse church for our listeners. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be some people in our church listening to this, and like we do have quite varied theological perspectives
For
on
sure.
the now, the future, and all that. But one of the things that I find so fascinating, I don't want to like out people, but there's a few people in particular where like I don't want to drop names,
Naming
but
names.
let's just say, yeah, because I mean maybe they would be fine with it, but and because a couple people come to mind who would not share in our hopefulness for the future, right? They would be much more, again, they wouldn't see it this way. We would say it this way, pessimistic, right? Things are going to get worse. That necessitates
Pessimistic within
pessimism. Like,
history, right? Like, let's
that's
be
right.
fair.
Yeah.
All of us believe Christ
Yeah.
wins. That's an optimistic
Yes,
view.
that's right.
We
That's
believe
right. Yeah.
we believe in optimism this side of Christ's return.
Yeah. And that's where I think, and I'm thankful for this, in that at least there's a couple people who come to mind in our church who would not share our view on that, but I would say live inconsistently within their theological system. And I'm thankful for that, because there are some men in our church who are just so faithful in
Yeah.
like building things, right?
Yep.
Building businesses,
And fighting cultural
building,
evils and all that.
yeah, like, and there are ministries within our church that are run by men who do not have our optimism, but they still have, and this is where I'm thankful, where when you have men who um still hold to that Jesus is king, he is
Yeah.
the one who has authority, he has told us to go and advance his kingdom. They might ultimately think that that work is not going to amount to the what we would say, where the entire world is literally going to be won over by the kingdom of God, and that we are going to see God's law cover the whole world, and we're going to see predominantly, if not like eventually, all the kings of the earth worshiping, all the families praising, the whole world being filled, covered with the knowledge of the glory of God as the water covers the sea. So like they might not see it getting to that point, but they still take seriously the, no, we need to do this now because Jesus told us to. Like, I need to make disciples now. I need to go and evangelize now. And so it's just, I'm encouraged by seeing that. But I think for us to see the wide scale impact culturally, it does have to necessarily come with a change of the theology
Yeah,
generally.
well, Jor, I think you're right. Like there are a lot of people who would not agree with us on the finer points of theology or eschatology and our optimism in those areas, and yet are inconsistent. We would say inconsistent in their work in a lot of areas in terms of um, sharing the gospel, fighting against cultural evils like abortion and things like that, but doesn't really leak into um, culture building. Right? It's more defensive than it is offensive. And I think that's kind of like what you're getting at. In order for us to actually create a counterculture, whatever you want to call it, a Christian culture, like you have to actually have a culture. You have to be able to make a culture in order to be able to like supplant the old one.
Mhm.
And I just don't think we do a good job at creating a positive vision of Christian culture.
Well,
So
because oh,
I
go
was just
ahead.
going to say that's a really important point, and maybe instead of talking sort of vaguely and abstractly, it might be helpful for our listeners to for us to get specific here. So in a more dispensational is the theological term, in a more dispensational framework, which is I would just say the vast majority, the sort of default position of most evangelical Christians. The art that has created in our culture, because here's the thing: the walls of the church are permeable. The way that we worship and the way that the church believes affects culture. That's how God has ordained it, and maybe we can do a whole episode on that at some point. But what we believe does affect the culture, negatively or positively. And what I would say is that sort of dispensational framework, if you think about what their theological framework is that all good, right? The church gets taken off of the earth gets left to the forces of evil. And because the earth gets left to the forces of evil, tyranny rises, wickedness rises, and all that kind of stuff. And they have, as they look forward to a future tribulation which shakes the whole earth and all that kind of stuff, that's in their theology. And what is that given rise to? Dystopian novels, cataclysms, right? You go back a few years ago when dispensationalism was, I would say there's a bit of a resurgence of our view of this stuff. But you go back, 2 decades, and all the movies, right? Dante's Peak about a cataclysmic volcano, and Armageddon about, a cataclysmic. So it doesn't have to be a
Well,
spiritual
you
cataclysm.
even bring up like the title of that movie, like even the terminology
That's right.
became mainstream in non-Christian circles of Armageddon and Revelation and Rapture and like all this stuff that um was unknown
Yeah.
to the broader culture not that long ago became very mainstream.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And so that sort of like Mad Max world that has been played out in a million different ways and a million different stories, right? Book of Eli comes to mind, all that kind of stuff. These are movies that's set in a dystopian future, and it shows the default in our minds is that the future is going to be worse, which is interesting because that actually rubs against the progressive secularism of our day. And it shows that like progressive secularism, that idea that humanity is still evolving and we aren't yet what we will be. People don't believe that in their heart of hearts. And the reason they don't believe it in their heart of hearts is because they have this default thing that something, whether it's climate change, whether it's aliens, whether it's civil war, whether it's nuclear holocaust, whatever the case is, something is going to destroy our future, and we're all going to have to, it's all going to get reset, and we're going to be back to kind of primitive days. And those are the stories that we tell because of the default position of the eschatology of the church.
Mhm. Yeah, it's uh thing that kind of comes to mind is how we see how the how weaponized media is, right? Like
Yeah.
we would say that our position is going to work because we're going to see its impact on education, on healthcare, on finance, on law, and all these things. And so our enemies have done the same thing. They have a very long term perspective and outlook, and they're slowly working through all of these institutions. And so it's just interesting how we see how media has obviously been weaponized, movies have been weaponized, and so these stories. I mean, there's just I think it's right now. It was just at maybe the Toronto Film Festival, perhaps. There's a movie coming out about Donald Trump, conveniently right before the election, where they're trying to make him out to be this racist, sexist, misogynist pig. And so how many people are going to watch that movie? I hope
Right
not as
before the
many as
election. Yeah.
before, but they're going to be like, oh wow, this guy's terrible.
Yeah.
So it's
I mean, it'll
interesting
be
though.
the people who already think Donald Trump is a
Yes,
Totally.
and it's just going to
racist,
reinforce and
sexist,
yeah,
misogynist pig.
yeah.
But yeah,
But you see how the theology of losing and the theology of this destruction and cataclysm, how then when a Christian watches a movie about a dystopian future, well, they've already bought into that, right?
Yeah.
So you see how the theology then impacts how they live, because then they watch these movies, which then reinforce these ideas of just the world. Is it going to be? It's not really about a matter of uh, whether the world is going to be physically destroyed. And I mean, like, even amongst in our system, or in our theological camp, there's some disagreement over, is the earth going to be physically renovated at his second coming, or is it, or like a brand new, or is it just going to be renovated, like whatever that mean. Like, there's some disagreement there. But then you just see how that system of theology, from like dispensationalism, for, I guess, when would that have been, in the late 1800s, that it started. So most of the media
Really
that
took
we know
root during the
today.
First World War.
Yeah. And so we now are living in that. And so the media is reflecting that. But then Christians, so many Christians, because they have bought into it, they then hear this, the parroting of climate change, and, oh, the world is getting hotter. And it's, you see these scary graphs on the map, and you see, oh, wow, that graph is red now. It's terrifying, even though those same numbers 5 years ago were green. And it just, because we've bought into it. So it's like, it actually does necessarily impact how we view the world. And then
Yeah.
you see all these Christians, unfortunately, being completely manipulated by our enemy, because they're using the system of theology and the worldview that they know that they have. And so it's just, you see this now, where it just kind of is perpetuating, and we're not really actually seeing people um, try to build anything different. Because,
Yeah.
well, again, as we said last time, like, what's the point? Like, why would we train our kids to um to want to build better art, when, what's the point, right?
Yeah.
It's just all going to get burned up. There's no point in instilling in our kids the values of excellence. Because, well, why are you going to build something excellent and build a cathedral for 500 years, when at any moment it could just be destroyed? So you're not even going to, right?
Yeah.
And that's where I think the danger, I don't want to say danger, because, again, like, we love our dispensational brothers and sisters. I mean, like, one of my best friends is a very staunch dispensationalist, and he's like one of the most faithful Christian guys I know, in terms of discipleship and loving his wife, loving his kids. Like, he's a leader in the church. He's a great guy. But we would disagree on that, and I would have concerns for these reasons, as to what the implications are of his theology, because of what I see it actually does to
Well,
our outlook.
yeah, because I think what it does is more subtle, right? And so what it does is it causes people to not want to build institutional power, really, because the idea is like, well, all the best we can do is sort of police our kids and family on Netflix, because there's not time left for us to build our own Netflix,
Yeah.
right? That's sort of the thing, and like that, and I think part of this comes from just Christians have a wariness of starting projects that are multi-generational projects. And I think that we need to get over that. I think we need to plan multi-generationally. And I think that's one of the reasons why our church works, is because different motivations or whatever, like even people who might not agree with our eschatological position are into the institution building side of things. It's like, yes, that is what we need to do. That is how we gain cultural influence and this sort of stuff. And I think, it even comes from this, it shows how affected by Marxism the church is, when the church is so shy about seizing any sort of power, right?
Mhm.
Marxism tells us that those with power are the oppressors,
Mm.
and they would
Everything's a
add.
power play. Yeah.
Yeah, and so we're so shy of power and influence, because we think that that's inherently bad. And what we would say is that no, like Jesus was very influential. Jesus had a large following. The reason he wasn't killed multiple times prior to the cross is not not only because of God's sovereignty, obviously that's a big part of it, but like it's because there were many times when the Pharisees were afraid to confront him because of the size of his following, the size of his influence, right? The power of the men who were following him. This is why his trial had to be done in the secret of the night when everybody was sleeping, when all his followers were sleeping. So I just say that to say, like, there are subtleties to this that have ramifications year over year over year over year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Why don't we just take a quick break for an ad read, and then I want to ask you guys bring something else up, another thing that I think is important to talk about here. But why don't we just take a quick break, and we'll hear from our sponsor. This episode of the Reforming Nerdom podcast is brought to you by the Ezra Institute. Founded in 2009 by Dr. Joe Boot, the Ezra Institute is dedicated to equipping Christians to think and live biblically in every area of life. Through in-person training programs, resources, and events, they help believers apply a Christian worldview to culture, education, politics, and more. With a growing presence in Canada, the US, and the UK, the Ezra Institute is committed to empowering the church to stand firm in today's secular world. Go to EzraInstitute.com to learn more. Now, back to the show. Well, welcome back, everybody. And we are getting to the end of our time together. But I think what I was wanting to just discuss as kind of the last part of our conversation was, we looked at the effects and impact of dispensationalism, obviously a very, what we would say, pessimistic, or just seeing a negative trajectory for history generally until the return of Christ is how they would understand that. That's not unique to dispensationalism. Other positions would also see things getting worse and worse and worse, just the order of events and things being a bit different. But one of the things that we see a lot today is Christians being uncomfortable with the idea of actually having Christian culture because of that negative outlook on things. So when we say, no, there's going to be a day where media is actually Christian, where we actually do have Christian companies, Christian content, where we have Christian law, where we actually see God's law being instituted again over in our countries, where we're going to see medicine not be run by drug cartels, but actually run by people who love God and love their neighbor and actually genuinely want to help people, not see them slowly die. So that how do we, or I guess, like, what does that impact? Like, how do we see even just that, where that whole view of Christian culture is not going to be a thing? We should not expect Christian culture. Like, what would you guys say to the skeptic who would say, well, how can you guys think that Christian culture is a good thing? How would you guys even respond to that?
Yeah, I think so. Like a lot of people will use this sort of well trodden saying that's like has no Christian background to it, but is just used all the time, of just, that power corrupts and ultimate power corrupts ultimately. And so they're just so afraid of Christians, like you mentioned before. It's this Marxist tendency of, like, we're so afraid of Christians holding any kind of power, and whether that's politically or otherwise, right? Like, power can still be like, oh, Christians have control of certain aspects of the media or certain aspects of the arts and of whatever it is. And like, I would just say that, like, that statement cannot be true, because like, who has ultimate power if not our Lord? And he is incorruptible, and our power comes from him. And so just like that idea that it's necessarily true that if and when a Christian took power, or a Christian group took power, that eventually that power would corrupt, and that institution would just uh, become everything that it said that it wasn't. I just think it's just a false presupposition.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that the interesting thing is that, I think people would most Christians, I would say, that have slid left, we'll say, have slid into secularism. The thing that they always will cling to is loving your neighbor, right? And what I would say is that our view actually loves our neighbors the best. Like, we love our neighbors so much that we would rather Christians rule them than pagans. We love our neighbors enough that we think they should be watching shows that glorify God, not shows that mock him. We love our Christian or our non Christian neighbors enough that we think that there should be schools that teach them that God created the world in 6 days and there is a God that they are accountable to, rather than the ludicrousy of evolution. So I think that's where Christians need to wrap their minds around. It sounds like a, a forceful thing. It sounds like a violent thing, because we can't imagine a world where Christ wins outside of the tip of the sword. And what we would just say is that no, God's way is better. Like, God's law shows us how life works best in his world. God's way is better. People would be better off if Christians ruled over them than people who hated God. And so this is the most loving perspective, because we love, and it not only loves neighbor enough, like I just said, but it actually loves the things that we're talking about enough, right? I love hockey, and I want hockey to be Christian, not pagan. I love
Mhm.
movies. I want movies to be Christian, not pagan, right? The various aspects of culture that we love, we have to love them enough to want to redeem them, rather than to see a future where they disappear.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the overarching error here is that people don't understand or don't believe that the scriptures or God's law actually has anything to say about these things. And so again, the false assumption is that if a Christian were to get into a position of power or influence, that whatever they did, whatever decisions they made, whatever changes happened would just be arbitrary.
Yeah.
When in fact, we actually have a handbook that completely, uh, gives us in every area the you know the how tos of all these, art, culture, sports, law. We just don't. We just think that it's an old book for people that lived a long time ago.
Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting when so many Christians, at least in this topic, you just bring up God's law, and obviously law has a direct bearing on how a culture lives and acts and operates. And how many Christians would say, well, you can't impose on a people God's law. And it's like, well, I mean, I know Dr. Boot says that quite regularly. It's like every law is being imposed. Like, we're having it imposed on us that we're not allowed to have LGBT conversations with our kids. Like, we're not allowed to do that, right? We're not, in COVID, we weren't allowed to gather and worship with our church family. So it's like law is being imposed. And then most Christians, I just don't think have actually thought about it. Where
Totally.
it's like, what would you rather? God's law, which is based on loving him and loving neighbor, or do you want one that is concocted by pagans who unapologetically hate you, hate your kids, want to see the destruction of everything that is good, true, and beautiful? And then, well, I think most Christians would say, well, I'd rather not that. But then, well, why is it that we can't?
Well, again, it's because they just don't actually believe there's an alternative.
No, and that's it. And that's what I think the importance of this, like, even when we say reforming, well, like, we are trying to push forward that a reformed perspective on the scriptures, on history, and reclaim these things. This even just like the thought. We don't just want to reclaim Star Wars. We want to reclaim the Christian mind to
Yeah.
actually have it be conformed to what we think is the true way of understanding the scriptures, to understanding culture and history, because otherwise we are just going to keep falling into the same bad habits that our the past few generations have actually fallen into.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good point, because I think some people who maybe are unfamiliar with these kinds of conversations, when they hear us talking about Christian movies and Christian art, they might think that all Christian art has to depict the cross, and all Christian movies have to be about a guy who gets converted. We're not talking about making art that is overtly Christian. We're talking about using a Christian mind and a Christian worldview to tell stories that are true about the world that God made. As Jordan said, what's good and true and beautiful. and we want what's good and true and beautiful to be celebrated. That doesn't mean that you don't show what is ugly, but you show what is ugly for what is ugly. That you show what is ugly and call it ugly. You show darkness and call it darkness. You show light and you call it light. And as such, you're telling the truth about how God created the world. So I'm not saying that there can't be a Star Wars style sci-fi set in the future thing that is. I'm not talking about how, Luke Skywalker needed to be a priest and an evangelist going and liberating aliens from their pagan views. It doesn't have to be overtly Christian to be Christian. And I think it's just, are you telling the truth about what is good and true and beautiful in God's world? And I think that that's the difference, is that even a lot of the stuff that we loved, it wasn't necessarily made by Christians or for Christians or with a Christian story, but they were told out of an ethos, out of a culture that still honored God to some degree. And that's why it's more true and more good and more beautiful than what's out there now. But you said something that was really interesting, Jordan, talking about how when we have these kinds of conversations, we're often accused of an imposition of morality. And the idea here is inescapability, right? Inescapable concept, that the imposition of morality is inescapable in the world. That's what a law is. A law, right, imposes a morality. A law that says a man shall not rape a woman is not only showing what that culture values. They value, a woman, but it also puts an imposition, right? It sets forth a morality. So when you think about abortion, which is one of the areas where we would often get accused of imposing our morality on women, well, it's not whether a morality is going to be imposed; it's which morality is going to be imposed and upon whom. So currently in Canada right now, it is illegal for a doctor to not send a woman who wants an abortion to somewhere where they can get an abortion. So what's happening in that scenario is that the imposition of the morality of the state is being imposed upon the doctor, who must refer, and to the unborn child in the womb, who will get murdered. So what all they've said is that we want abortion to be free and a basic woman's right, which all they're saying is that we want our morality pushed on the doctor and on the young, preborn child. So the imposition of morality, whether it's my morality on the mother saying you cannot kill your baby, or someone else's morality being pushed on the unborn child and the doctor, the imposition of morality is inescapable. And I think just to kind of tie a bow on this conversation, I think one of the things that we're saying in this whole project of reforming nerddom is that art is inescapable. And so, we are created in the image of God, which means we are created as creating beings. We are creative. We have minds. We want to create. We want to take the raw materials of creation and turn them into something. Art is inescapable. And because art is inescapable, there will be either good art or bad art, beautiful art or ugly art. There will be great stories or awful stories. And that's what we're saying, is that it's inescapable. So why not make them Christian?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I love. There's a guy in our church who he even concedes the point where he has not been persuaded by our theological argument, but he sees it as a better way to live for him and his family, and so he's like, I'm still going to do it because that is just a better way to live, right? It's a better way to raise my kids. It's a better way, and I don't want my kid, or he doesn't want his kids to be depressed and everything. And so it's like, even though he struggles with being able to see it, he's like, this is a better way. And I think he understands that. Okay, I think he might even be of the persuasion that maybe it is right. I'm just not there yet. But because I see the net good that it comes just for the health of him, between him and his wife and his kids, he's just actually decided that I'm going to live this way because it's better for my family, even if he might not be able to articulate it or understand it theologically. But I just think it's fascinating that that's where he's at.
Sounds like we're making post-millennialism great again.
We're trying. We're doing what we can. But all right, is there anything else you guys want to add? Nate, you already did tie the bow. Is there anything else you guys want to add? If not, we'll wrap this up. But I do want to ask you guys just one quick question, and I think as we're we're doing a nerd podcast, and I'm trying to use this as an excuse to embrace nerd stuff and try to spend a little bit more time doing some of the things we love and live by example, and not just talk about nerd stuff, but actually enjoy it as well. So I'm curious, what is something nerdy that you can be doing, or that you want to do, or that you plan to do in the next little bit? What's something that you want to maybe start doing again, or start doing for the first time? Is there anything that kind of comes to mind for you guys?
You mean other than GoldenEye tournaments?
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, like that
And
is a
talking about nerd stuff on a podcast.
yeah, but
Yeah.
if we want to talk about nerd stuff, we got to do some nerd stuff as well. So for
So
me, just even I have actually trying to carve out some time for playing video games. I know, like last week when we were chatting, I mean, generally speaking, and over the last well, since I've been married, like video games has been a hard thing for me to really find time for. I'm never going to be in a place where I'm spending hours a day, but I would like to try to get to a place where I could maybe spend a couple hours a week. And so one of the things that I've been trying to do is, and maybe a bit more moving forward, is just finding that time to do that in a way that obviously doesn't disrupt my time with my wife and my kids. So sometimes what we've been doing lately is, if we're watching, just like, I mean, playoff baseball's on right now, and that's pretty much what's on in our house at night. So we'll do that. My wife, Melissa, will just be on her phone looking at stuff, researching things. She likes doing crafts, so sometimes she'll be doing crafts, and I'll just be on a mobile thing on the couch, and we're still chatting, but I'll be playing something just for a little bit, and do that a couple nights a week. And so that's been kind of nice. And I want to try to do that a bit more, because I do love playing video games. So that's kind of my thing that I'm doing and hoping to do, is actually enjoy video games for what they are, but still trying to do it in an appropriate amount.
Yeah, I think for me, like as my kids are getting older, it's all about like what can I do with them? And so trying to find stuff that they're also interested in that I can do with them that we'll both enjoy. So they all do play a little bit of PlayStation kind of thing. So we do that every once in a while together. Although I did go on just the other day and realize that my PS Plus subscription had run out, and
Mm.
now it's just like an ungodly amount to renew that stupid thing. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I'm gonna do that again. But one thing we have started doing actually is my two older boys have all of a sudden just gotten like really into drawing and sketching and stuff, and I have never ever been into that. I've never been the artistic type at all, but I was just like, you know what? This is something I want to like. I want you guys, if you're gonna do it, like do it well. Actually, like watch some videos, learn how to do it, and so we've sat down and we've every day for the I don't know every day. It's been like 4 days. We've been like, all right, we're gonna like do a sketch together, or do like actually sit down. So that's been fun. I don't know how nerdy per se that is, but that's something we've been doing together.
well, I'll answer the question and give you a way of making it more nerdy, Ben. So my daughter Quinn is super into drawing and art and stuff like that as well. I've never been the visual artist. My art's always been in word form. But Quinn is super into drawing and stuff like that. So I actually got her. She was asking for some sketchbooks. So I went and got her a sketchbook, and I saw where I went also this comic book. So it's a comic book
Mm.
with the various like panes in it and speech bubbles and stuff like that, and like the little
And then you
like
just fill it in.
and you fill it in, you write a story. So I'm actually doing that with her now. Is like I'm telling her to, yeah, let's make a superhero, and let's tell a story about this superhero. Okay, what kind of powers does this superhero have? What kind of this, what kind of that? So I'm doing that with her right now, which is super cool. She's the drawer, I'm helping her with the story side of things, but like I'm just realizing that generally she's just not as, if I say to Judah, like, what's his superpowers? He's like, well, he's obviously super strong and he can fly and he can melt things with his eyes and he can also shoot green lasers out of his hands. Girls don't think that way. It's like,
Quinn's like, his superpower is that he's super nice.
yeah, a little bit, right? So I'm like trying to teach her about like, well, it needs a villain, it needs a bad guy. But stories are better when there's a bad guy. So there's all kinds of cool stuff like that. So anyway, my daughter and I are making a comic book, and that's sort of the thing that we're doing together right now.
Very cool.
Nice.
Very cool. All right. Well, I think that's everything for this week. So thank you, listeners, for joining us. And if you enjoyed the show, subscribe on whatever podcast platform you're using, or go to YouTube to see any future episodes. And yeah, I don't want to forget the Patreon. So as Nate mentioned, that's going to be getting a lot more content. So we'd love for you to join us over
Just
there.
so
And
much GoldenEye.
well, and also, if by the time this records, perhaps we haven't had it set up quite yet, but we're also going to have a Discord on there for the Patreon. So our hope for this just to be a legit community of Christian nerds where we can just share, movies, games, books, comics, whatever it is, things like that, and just talk about it. And we can also just share funny memes about Rings of Power, and that's going to be fun too, and making fun of that stuff. But yeah, anyways, that's enough for today. But yeah, thank you for listening, and until next time, stay nerdy.